Logan had always moved through life quietly, the type of person who preferred unnoticed routines over dramatic scenes, and anyone watching him that evening would have thought he was just another delivery worker, trying to complete his shift before the night grew colder. His coworkers often described him as calm, polite, almost too gentle for the noisy kitchen environment he worked in, never realizing that this calmness was something learned and practiced, not something naturally given. He had a way of thinking things through before reacting, a way of absorbing pressure without showing cracks, and people assumed it came from a simple, peaceful life. But those who thought that didn't know the layers beneath his silence. They didn't know that Logan's upbringing had been shaped by a man whose name carried a weight heavy enough to silence entire rooms. His father, an infamous figure whispered about in the criminal underworld. Years ago, when newspapers were filled with stories about a dramatic raid that supposedly ended a reign of fear, everyone believed Logan's father had disappeared for good. Some said he had died. Others said he had escaped overseas. No one ever guessed that he had chosen something far more unexpected, a hidden life in the shadows, watching the world from a distance while quietly protecting the only person he loved. Logan knew the truth but kept it buried. He refused to live off connections forged through violence. He wanted to walk his own path, even if that meant delivering pizzas in quiet suburbs, instead of living behind walls guarded by people who followed orders without question. That evening, Logan loaded the insulated bags onto his scooter with the familiar efficiency of someone who had done it thousands of times. The kitchen had been chaotic. Friday nights always were. But he moved through the noise without letting it affect him. Once outside, the air felt different, heavier, as though the night was holding its breath. He rode through the busy part of town, passing laughter from rooftop bars and the glow of neon signs reflecting off damp sidewalks. But as soon as he turned toward Maple Street, the atmosphere changed. That stretch had a reputation for attracting trouble, mostly in the form of local boys who thought of themselves as street kings. Logan had seen them before but always passed through without incident. He believed that problems grew only when fed attention, and his way of dealing with hostility was to offer none in return. Still, as he entered the quiet lane, he noticed something off. No barking dogs. No distant cars, no porch lights left on accidentally. It was a strange, almost staged silence. He continued forward until a group stepped out from behind a parked vehicle, blocking the narrow road entirely. 3 of them, moving with the swagger of boys who relied on numbers instead of strength. Their laughter drifted toward him before their words did, the kind of laughter that didn't carry joy. Just boredom and cruelty mixed into a sound. Logan slowed the scooter and kept his expression neutral. He thought that if he stayed composed, they would let him pass, but the tallest of them placed a hand on the scooter's front, stopping it as if testing how far he could push without resistance. Logan asked to pass, not raising his voice, not showing any sign of intimidation. This only amused them more. Before he could react, one of them tugged the pizza bags off the back of the scooter, treating them like prizes waiting to be claimed. Another unzipped a bag and shouted in excitement at the sight of the food inside. Logan stepped forward to take them back, but a shove sent him stumbling to the ground, scraping his hands as the scooter tipped sideways. The boys didn't leave after taking the pizzas. They lingered, mocking him, tossing slices to each other while suggesting he should be grateful they didn't take his scooter as well. Their ringleader crouched beside him and made a remark that wasn't loud, but sharp enough to cut deeper than the fall. He said people like Logan were born to stay insignificant, born to serve, born to be walked over. Logan did not respond. He didn't argue. He didn't rise to the provocation. Years of discipline taught him not to lose control, no matter how much disrespect was thrown at him. He stood up, righted his fallen scooter, brushed the dirt from his clothes, and walked away from the scene while their laughter echoed behind him like a victorious chant. He didn't look back, even though part of him wanted to. But deep inside, he knew there were moments in life where restraint carried more strength than reaction. When he finally reached the end of Maple Street, his phone vibrated in his pocket with a short message. There were no unnecessary words, just a question from someone who always sensed when something was wrong. His father wanted to know where he was. Logan hadn't called, hadn't complained, hadn't said a single thing. But his father's network, silent and invisible, watched the city the way a hawk watches the ground. Cameras on street corners, informants who blended with crowds, watchers who owed old loyalties. All of them had seen what happened. By the time Logan read the message, wheels were already turning in places he wished they wouldn't. The man people believed dead had already begun moving his pieces, quietly and dangerously, ready to make anyone who touched his son regret the decision for the rest of their lives. Logan tried to continue his deliveries as if nothing had happened, but the weight of the moment clung to him like dust that refused to shake off. He reached the next block with slow, steady breaths, reminding himself that losing pizzas wasn't the end of the world. He could return to the shop, explain what happened, maybe even offer to redo the order. That was the practical path, the peaceful one, the path he always chose. But as he rode beneath streetlights that flickered like tired eyes, he felt a familiar tension settling in his chest, one he had spent years learning to control. People often assumed that calm individuals were simply born calm, but Logan knew better. His calmness was a skill, sharpened over years under the roof of a man who never showed weakness. His father had always taught him that silence was a shield, that anger left exposed became a weapon for others to use. Logan had lived by that rule, refusing to let the shadow of his father's name dictate the way he handled the world. He believed in restraint, in earning his place, in never relying on power that came from someone else's fear. But even with all that discipline, something about that night pressed against the invisible boundaries he set for himself. Not the stolen pizzas, not even the shove. It was the casual way they dismissed him, the assumption that he was nobody. Not because he cared about their opinion. He didn't. But because he had spent years proving to himself that he could live without violence, and nights like this tested the integrity of that promise. As he reached a quieter intersection, he stopped the scooter near an old bench beneath a flickering lamp. He removed his helmet and sat for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. The town felt different now. Not peaceful, just empty, like it was holding back a breath it didn't want to release. He checked his hands, noticing the fine scrapes along his palms, the dirt pressed into his skin. They stung, but the injury wasn't what stayed on his mind. Instead, his attention drifted to his phone, the unread message glowing faintly at the top of the screen. His father rarely contacted him directly unless it was truly important. He usually remained hidden, watching from a distance, respecting Logan's desire for a normal life. So a message meant movement, and movement from a man like him was never simple. Logan hesitated before responding, knowing that even a single word could trigger a chain of events he couldn't stop. He typed a reply that said he was fine, but the moment he hovered over the send button, he erased it. He knew it would be a lie, and lies, especially to his father, had a way of unraveling far more than the truth ever could. Before he could decide what to do, another message arrived. This one wasn't a question. It was a brief order, the kind his father used only when he had already made a decision. Come home. Logan froze. That phrase carried a meaning far heavier than its simplicity suggested. It meant his father had seen what happened. It meant preparations were underway. It meant the quiet life Logan worked so hard to build was seconds away from colliding with the world he avoided. He considered ignoring the message, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. His father didn't wait for replies. He acted. Logan felt the cold air shift around him, as if the night itself understood what was coming. He put on his helmet again, started the scooter, and headed toward the outskirts of town where the estate was hidden behind thick trees and long dirt paths. The ride felt longer than usual, his mind swirling through memories of how he grew up surrounded by men who followed orders with robotic precision. He remembered the drills, the instructions, the constant reminders that danger lived in every corner of the world. His father had tried to raise him to be strong, but Logan had chosen a different kind of strength, one that didn't require fear or violence. By the time he arrived at the gate, it was already open for him, controlled by someone watching from a hidden outpost. The long gravel path toward the house felt like stepping back into a version of himself he had retired. The estate lights glowed softly through the trees, and shadows moved like silent guardians between the branches. Logan parked the scooter near the entrance, knowing his father had already been alerted to his arrival. The front door was open slightly, never wide enough to feel inviting but enough to signal that someone inside was expecting him. Logan stepped inside, and the familiar scent of old wood, cigars, and leather filled the hall. The place felt untouched by time, preserved in the atmosphere of a world that operated by its own rules. His father was seated in the main room, not like a king on a throne, but like a quiet storm waiting to choose its direction. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush forward with dramatic concern. Instead, he observed Logan the way generals observe battlefields, slowly, thoroughly, detecting every detail without asking a single question. He gestured for Logan to sit, and Logan obeyed, knowing that the real conversation didn't begin with words, but with what remained unspoken. His father's expression stayed unreadable, but his eyes carried a sharpness that revealed he had already been informed about everything. The bullies, the pizzas, the shove, the insult. He didn't need Logan to describe it. He had more than enough eyes in the shadows to deliver every piece of information. What he wanted now was to understand Logan's reaction, or the lack of it. In the silence that stretched between them, his father finally spoke, not with anger, but with a controlled calmness that always carried the weight of a quiet threat behind it. He said that someone had crossed a line, not because they touched the pizzas, not because they caused trouble, but because they dared to lay hands on someone he had sworn to protect. Logan tried to explain that it wasn't worth escalating, that he didn't want violence, that he had handled it in his own way. But his father listened with the patience of someone who had already made a decision long before hearing arguments. He reminded Logan that restraint was noble, but there were moments when allowing disrespect only invited more. Logan lowered his gaze, knowing he wasn't going to win this discussion. His father then stood, walked toward a desk, and picked up a small device used to contact his most loyal men. He didn't yell. He didn't show rage. He simply said a few coded words, the kind that would summon people from the darkest corners of the city within minutes. Logan felt his stomach drop as he realized that the peaceful world he carefully built had already been overtaken by the one he had tried to escape. And as he sat there, surrounded by walls filled with echoes of a powerful past, he understood that the bullies on Maple Street had no idea what they had stepped into. They thought they had stolen pizzas from a harmless delivery boy. They didn't know they had touched the son of a man who ruled entire cities from the shadows. And somewhere deep inside the estate, engines began to start, footsteps began to gather, and the night prepared itself for consequences that could not be undone. Logan remained seated even after his father's men dispersed into the night, moving with practiced precision like shadows breaking away from a single point. He could hear the muffled sounds of vehicles starting in the distance. Engines humming in low tones meant not to disturb the quiet surrounding the estate. Every sound reminded him of the years he spent trying to outrun the world he was born into. His father returned to his seat across from him, saying nothing for a long while. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was heavy, filled with understanding. Neither of them spoke aloud. Logan knew his father believed he was doing the right thing, protecting the family name, sending a message to anyone who thought they could harm someone under his protection. But Logan also knew that the world outside wasn't built on the same rules. It didn't respond to fear the way the underworld did. He tried to imagine what those boys on Maple Street were doing now, probably bragging, laughing, finishing the stolen pizzas without realizing their actions had already triggered a dangerous ripple. Logan leaned back in his chair, feeling the old leather shift beneath him, and wondered if there was a way to stop what was coming. But stopping his father's plans was never simple. Once wheels started turning, they rarely stopped until the road itself ended. His father finally broke the silence, his tone calm but firm, the voice of someone used to giving orders rather than asking opinions. He said that letting people walk over Logan was not an option, that strength was not always measured by fists, but by showing the world where the boundaries lay. Logan understood the logic. He had seen enough growing up to know how far disrespect could go if left unchecked. But he also knew that reacting with force often created more problems than it solved. He tried once more to reason with his father, explaining that these were just bored teenagers, not dangerous enemies, not rival factions seeking to challenge authority. His father listened, but his eyes showed a quiet disbelief. To him all threats were equal, small ones simply grew into big ones if ignored. Logan could see his father's resolve hardening with every passing moment, and he felt a helplessness rising in him. Not fear, but frustration. He didn't want violence to follow him wherever he went. He didn't want his father's reputation to define every conflict he faced. Yet the very thing he dreaded had already been set into motion. As the minutes passed, Logan realized that his father was expecting something from him. Not agreement, not approval, but presence. He wanted Logan to understand that he wasn't alone, that the family's power existed not to control him but to shield him. Logan appreciated the intention, even if he didn't agree with the method. Still, it didn't lighten the heaviness pressing against his chest. He wondered what his life might look like if his father had chosen another path. He wondered if he would still be delivering pizzas, still living quietly, still believing that restraint was enough to navigate a world filled with unpredictable people. But wishing didn't change reality. His father's past had shaped him, and whether he liked it or not, the effects lingered in every corner of his life. Logan stood from his seat, feeling the weight of the evening settle in his shoulders, and moved toward the window. Outside, the estate grounds stretched far and dark, lit only by soft lamps and the distant headlights of departing vehicles. The night carried an unsettling stillness, as if waiting for the story to continue unfolding. Before Logan could speak again, one of his father's trusted men entered the room, a tall figure with a steady voice and eyes that never revealed emotion. He reported that they had already located the boys, that they were still on Maple Street with no idea of what was coming. Logan felt a tightening in his throat as he listened to the details. They weren't being approached yet, just watched. Observed. Measured. His father nodded slowly, his expression unchanging, the same look he always wore when processing information. Logan stepped forward, asking the man to wait, to give him a momentary pause before things escalated. The man glanced at his father, not at Logan, waiting for permission. Logan's father didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up with deliberate calmness, crossed the room, and placed a firm hand on Logan's shoulder. It wasn't aggressive. It was grounding. He said that Logan had lived long enough pretending he was separate from the world he came from, that pretending didn't change blood, history, or the lengths a father would go to defend his child. Logan didn't respond, because there were no words that could bridge the divide between who he wanted to be and the lineage he carried. The man at the door cleared his throat gently, asking again if they were to proceed. Logan could sense the night thickening with tension. His father removed his hand and turned toward the window, saying they would move soon but not yet. He wanted a final detail, how badly Logan had been hurt. Logan insisted it wasn't serious, merely a scrape. His father didn't look convinced. To him, the physical injury was irrelevant. It was the disrespect that mattered. He asked Logan to describe exactly what happened, and Logan realized there was no way to soften the truth. He recounted the confrontation, the shove, the comments, the stolen pizzas. His father's expression darkened, not with fury but with the cold calculation of a man updating the scale of consequences. Logan tried to emphasize that he didn't want revenge, but his father only said that some messages weren't for Logan. They were for the world watching. Logan exhaled, his breath shaky though he hid it well, and knew that whatever was coming was now inevitable. Somewhere in the city, those boys laughed over a victory they believed they'd earned, unaware that the night had already chosen a path that would lead them somewhere far darker than they imagined. Logan remained near the window for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing as the weight of the night settled even heavier around him. The estate, usually a place he avoided unless absolutely necessary, felt smaller than usual, as if its walls had moved inward, reminding him that every decision made inside them carried consequences far beyond their quiet halls. He watched the faint glow of headlights weaving through the trees as men continued positioning themselves. They moved with a discipline that came from years of loyalty, years of surviving under his father's command. Logan remembered seeing those same men when he was a child, towering figures who treated him with surprising softness, offering him candy or showing him card tricks, while discussing matters of violence just a few rooms away. Back then, he didn't understand who they really were. He only understood that everyone respected his father, sometimes with warmth, sometimes with fear. And now, watching them mobilize again after years of silence, he felt a strange combination of guilt and helplessness. None of this would be happening if he had simply walked a different street, taken a later shift, or even defended himself in a way that made the bullies run. But fate had collided with him in a way he never asked for, and the night had turned into a storm he couldn't stop. His father approached him slowly, not with anger, but with the solemn steadiness of someone preparing for battle. He asked Logan a question, not whether he was hurt, not whether he was afraid, but whether he understood why they couldn't ignore what happened. Logan hesitated, his fingers tightening slightly against the window frame. He understood perfectly in his father's world, disrespect was like a disease. If left untreated, it spread. Today it might be 3 reckless boys, tomorrow it could be someone with real intentions. But Logan also believed that responding with overpowering force only fed a cycle that never truly ended. He explained this softly, his voice steady but earnest, trying to bridge the gap between their two worlds. His father listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, his silence absorbing every word. When Logan finished, his father simply said that peace was a luxury bought by unseen battles, and that the only reason Logan had been able to live quietly was because someone else carried the burden of keeping threats away. Before Logan could respond, another man entered, this one older, with a scar running across his jaw, someone Logan remembered from his childhood. The man informed them that the boys were now sitting behind an abandoned basketball court, sharing the stolen pizzas and roughhousing with loud, careless bravado. He described their attitude as laughing, unbothered, unprepared. Logan felt his stomach twist. He didn't want to imagine what would happen if his father's men reached them without restraint. His father asked if the boys had anyone nearby, weapons, older companions, or anything that would complicate the situation. The man answered no. They were alone, foolish, and headed toward a lesson they could not possibly anticipate. Logan stepped forward quickly, asking, almost pleading, for time. He said he didn't want this to go further. He insisted he didn't want fear to shape the life he was trying to build. The scarred man shifted uncomfortably, not because he disagreed, but because he wasn't used to seeing Logan intervene in affairs like this. His father raised a hand, signaling for silence. Logan's father then turned toward him fully, his eyes steady, not angry, not disappointed, just deeply resolved. He said that protecting Logan was not about violence but about responsibility. He spoke about enemies from the past who still watched the family name, waiting for signs of weakness. He said that letting someone harm Logan without consequence would send those enemies the wrong message, inviting danger not just to Logan, but to every person in the estate who had sworn loyalty. Logan knew this was the unbreakable part of his father. Behind every decision was a web of power, alliances, debts, and threats stretching across years. This wasn't about three boys. It was about what the world would assume if nothing happened to them. Logan wanted to argue, to say that the world he lived in now didn't operate by those rules. But he also knew that his father lived in a parallel reality, one where hesitation cost lives, where showing mercy to the wrong person could ignite something far worse. Logan found himself caught between two truths: the peaceful world he wanted and the violent world that still depended on the shadows his father controlled. The older man stepped closer, lowering his voice as if trying to shield Logan from harsh details. He said the boys hadn't left Maple Street because they believed no one would challenge them. That kind of arrogance, he implied, was dangerous. But then he added something else, something softer. He said that Logan had always been different from the rest of them, that it was something they respected, and that if Logan truly wanted a different outcome, he needed to say what he expected them to do. Logan froze. No one had ever asked for his direction before. His father's men operated on orders from one person only. And now the question hung in the air like a test. Logan could feel both his father's eyes and his own conscience pressing on him. What did he want? Absolute mercy? A warning? A confrontation without violence? Something else? The weight of choosing pulled at him. He realized that any path he picked would define the kind of man he intended to be, separate from his father, or shaped partially by him. The room fell into silence, and the night outside seemed to hold still, waiting for Logan's answer. People later whispered that Caleb walked home that night with a strange kind of calm, as if the world had finally rearranged itself into a shape that made sense. The last stretch of road felt different under his feet, no longer the same path where he had once feared shadows and sudden noises. He had returned the bike, talked to the police, and given his statement without once raising his voice, and even the officers had watched him with an odd mix of curiosity and respect, as if sensing there was more behind his quiet nature than he revealed. On the way back, he had taken the longer route through the park, letting the slow wind settle everything that had happened, and it became clear to him that life had handed him a night he would never forget. One where he had been robbed, threatened, and dragged through fear, yet still walked out untouched because someone had decided he mattered. At home, his father had been waiting near the porch light, saying nothing at first, only placing a hand on his shoulder with a pressure that meant more than a speech. Caleb understood then that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it appeared quietly, wearing the face of a man who kept his world safe from the dark without asking for recognition. And as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him, he felt something settle deep inside, a steady certainty that whatever challenges came next, he would never walk through them alone.